All right, let's jump right in because we've got a really fascinating puzzle to solve. Economic theory, the stuff in all the textbooks, is built on this idea of a perfectly rational person. But we know, you know, that in real life we are anything but. So the big question is, how on earth do our economic models even work if their most basic assumption about us is just wrong? That's what we're going to unpack.
And this really gets to the heart of the problem. On one side, you've got this ideal rational agent, a perfect, cold, calculating machine. And on the other side, well, you have us. Real people. Our minds are bounded, we use mental shortcuts, we're riddled with biases. And a lot of the time, we're just running on impulse and habit. It's not just a small gap, it's a chasm.
So that brings us to the central puzzle for this whole explainer. If we are not the perfect little economic robots that the models need us to be, why doesn't the entire system just grind to a halt and collapse? Why is it that markets, for the most part, actually seem to work in pretty predictable ways? Okay, so our first major clue comes from a Nobel Prize winner, Gary Becker. And his idea, it completely flips this problem on its head. He basically said, you're all looking in the wrong place. The answer isn't what's going on inside our complicated, messy heads. It's about what's happening in the world outside of them.
And here's the core of his argument, right from the man himself. He says that changes in our opportunities, things like prices going up or our income going down, can actually force us to act in a way that looks rational, no matter what we're actually thinking or feeling. The market itself disciplines us.
So here's the key takeaway from that. Your choices are shaped way more by the hard limits of your budget than by the raw power of your brain. Seriously, it doesn't matter if you're a genius or you're just throwing darts at a board to make decisions. If you don't have the money, you can't buy the thing. That's the real-world constraint. Let's make this super simple. We all love avocados, right? Imagine the price doubles overnight. But your grocery budget for the week is the same as it always is. So what happens? You're forced to buy fewer avocados. It has nothing to do with your feelings about avocados, it's just math. The result is totally predictable. Market demand goes down. And that's Becker's point. The rational outcome happens because of the constraint, not because every shopper did a perfect cost-benefit analysis.
Okay, that sounds pretty solid, right? But there's a catch. A big one. Becker's argument is great if all our weird little mistakes are random and just cancel each other out. But what happens when our irrationality goes viral? What happens when we all start making the exact same mistake, all at the same time?
And this is where behavioral economics really enters the chat. See, Becker's idea kind of hinges on our screw-ups being random. But what if they're not? What if they're systematic? Just think about a housing bubble, right? That's not a random error. That's almost everyone at once believing the lie that prices can only go up. That kind of mistake doesn't cancel out. It compounds. It snowballs. And you see these biases everywhere. Herding behavior is just a fancy way of saying we follow the crowd, sometimes right off a cliff, like during a market panic. Or framing effects. Think about it. Why does a yogurt that says 90% fat-free sell better than one that says 10% fat? They're the same thing, but one just feels healthier. These things don't average out to zero. They pull the whole market in one direction.
So this just deepens the mystery for us. If these constraints, like our budgets, are the bedrock holding the market together, where do they ultimately come from? What enforces the budget in the first place? What's the bedrock underneath the bedrock?
Well, it turns out the answer is this really fundamental, kind of old-school economic law. It's the thing that underpins literally everything else we've been talking about, the true source of all those constraints.
It's a principle called Say's law, and when you boil it down, it's actually incredibly simple. It just means that you can only buy things with the money you get from making things of value. Production has to come first.
Now, you might have heard this simplified as supply creates its own demand, but that's a bit misleading and gets people confused. The real meaning is way more intuitive. You just can't demand, you can't buy something, unless you first produce something of value to get the money, whether that's your labor, a product you made, or a service you provided. Production is what creates your purchasing power.
And this is the unbreakable loop at the heart of the whole economy. Step 1, production creates value. Step 2, that value gets paid out to people as income. And step 3, that income is what enables us to then demand other goods and services. You see? This loop, this is the ultimate constraint that holds the whole system together.
Okay, so if Say's law is the deep foundation, that still leaves a burning question. How do we explain those moments of collective madness? The bubbles, the manias, the crashes. How can a market swing from being so incredibly wise to dangerously insane and then somehow find its way back? This table really breaks down the difference perfectly. The wisdom of crowds works when we all have our own little independent errors that just cancel each other out. It's a self-correcting system. But the madness of crowds, that's what happens when our errors are correlated. When we all start making the same mistake, it becomes a self-reinforcing feedback loop that leads straight to bubbles and crashes.
And let's be honest, our individual judgment can be just awful. I mean, check out this number. A study looked at chief financial officers, people who should know better, right? When they were 80% confident in their stock market predictions, they were actually right only 36% of the time. That is a massive, massive overconfidence bias right there.
But now, look at this. This is the amazing part. If you take just 100 of those flawed individual judgments and you average them, you can reduce that random error, what they call noise, by a staggering 90%. That's the magic of aggregation. It filters out all the individual mistakes to find the clear signal hidden underneath.
So what does this all mean? It means the solution isn't to try and fix our flawed human brains. I mean, good luck with that, right? No, the real genius is in building systems, like markets or certain forecasting techniques, that are designed to take all of our noisy, imperfect inputs and somehow pull out a single, much more accurate answer.
And we actually see this in action with a group of people called super forecasters. These are just regular folks who are shockingly good at predicting future events. And their secret? It's not some sky-high IQ. It's a process. They break down problems, they're open-minded, and they're constantly updating their beliefs. They're basically acting like a tiny, efficient market, all inside their own heads.
Okay, let's tie this all back together. The reason the economy is so resilient, the reason it doesn't just fly apart, isn't because we're all rational. It's because the system itself has evolved these built-in, and yeah, they're imperfect, but still powerful mechanisms for filtering out our collective madness over the long run.
And that brings us to the final takeaway. Behavioral economics doesn't actually destroy traditional microeconomics at all. In fact, it does the opposite. It shows us why it's so robust. It reveals that the foundation of the market isn't built on the flimsy assumption of perfect human brains, but on the much harder, much more solid ground of real-world constraints and powerful adaptive systems. So, I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. If markets have these incredible ways to eventually recover from our collective crazy, then maybe our irrationality isn't just a bug in the system. Maybe it's a feature. Maybe it's the very thing that forces the system to learn, to adapt, and to ultimately become even stronger. What do you think?